The voice came from above. "There you are. My grandson's intended. We have been waiting." Waverly Ashcombe stood in the entrance hall of Harlow Hall with rain still dripping from his coat, his travel satchel clutched against his chest, and felt the words land like a door closing behind him. The Dowager Lady Harlow was descending the main staircase. She was small, frail, wrapped in shawls despite the warmth of the hall, but her voice carried with the absolute certainty of someone who had never been contradicted in her life. Servants had frozen mid-motion. Mr. Albright, the elderly steward who had greeted Waverly at the door, had gone very still. "My lady," Waverly began, his voice emerging as barely a whisper. "I am not. You are exactly as described." The Dowager reached the bottom of the stairs and took Waverly's hands in her own. Her grip was surprisingly strong. Gentle temperament. Quiet. An omega of good breeding. The portrait did not do you justice. Portrait. Waverly's mind snagged on the word. He had never sat for a portrait. The Ashcombes would never have commissioned one. He was adopted, tolerated, useful but never celebrated. Yet the Dowager spoke as if she had seen his likeness, studied it, made judgments about his character from canvas and paint. "My lady, there has been a mistake. I was sent as a companion, not. Crispin will be pleased." The Dowager spoke over him as if he had not spoken at all. She turned to Mr. Albright. "Have the East Chamber prepared. The one adjoining my grandson's. We will announce the engagement formally at dinner." Mr. Albright's eyes flicked to Waverly. Something passed across the old steward's face. Sympathy, perhaps, or recognition of a fellow creature caught in machinery too large to resist. Then he bowed. "As you wish, my lady." Waverly stood frozen, his hands still trapped in the Dowager's grip, his correction dying unspoken in his throat. He had been in Harlow Hall for less than 10 minutes, and already his identity had been rewritten by a woman who did not know his name. And then the Alpha entered. Crispin Harlow came through a side door with the quiet authority of someone who belonged everywhere he stood. He was 30 years old, tall and dark-haired, his face all sharp angles and controlled stillness. He wore no jacket, his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, as if he had been interrupted in the middle of something. His scent reached Waverly before his voice did. Cedarwood and cold air, the clean sharpness of winter. "Grandmother." His voice was low, calm. "You should not be on the stairs without assistance. I am perfectly capable of greeting my grandson's intended." The Dowager released one of Waverly's hands to gesture toward him. "Crispin, this is Mr. Ashcombe, the Omega from Somerset. He has just arrived." Crispin's gaze found Waverly. Held. Something flickered in those dark eyes. Recognition, assessment, a calculation happening too fast to follow. Then his expression smoothed back into unreadable composure. "Mr. Ashcombe." He inclined his head. "You had a difficult journey, I imagine. The roads are poor this time of year." The roads were fine. Waverly's voice came out steadier than he felt. "My lord, I believe there has been a misunderstanding. I was sent by my family to serve as a companion to the Dowager, not as. The Dowager has made her wishes clear." Crispin's interruption was smooth, absolute. "We will discuss the arrangements later. For now, Mr. Albright will show you to your quarters. You should rest before dinner." It was not a suggestion. It was a dismissal dressed in politeness. And Waverly understood, with the cold clarity of someone who had spent his life reading the spaces between words, that Crispin Harlow knew exactly what the Dowager had done. He knew Waverly was not the intended bride. He knew a mistake had been made, and he was choosing to let it stand. Dinner was a performance in 4 courses. The formal dining room glittered with candlelight and silver, the table set for 4. The Dowager at the head, Crispin to her right, Waverly to her left, and Mr. Albright at the far end as witness. Portraits of Harlow ancestors lined the walls. Generations of alphas, all watching, all judging. The Dowager announced the engagement between the soup and the fish. "It will be a winter wedding," she said, as if discussing the weather. "Small, of course. The family is not what it was. But proper. The banns will be read starting Sunday. Waverly looked at Crispin. The alpha was cutting his fish with precise, unhurried movements. He did not look up. "My lady," Waverly said carefully, "I am honored by your consideration. But I must be clear, I was sent here as a companion. My family arranged nothing regarding a marriage. I have no dowry, no connections, no." "The Ashcombs are an old family," the Dowager interrupted. "Connections are not the issue. And as for dowry," she waved a hand, "Crispin does not need money. He needs a spouse. The inheritance laws are quite clear. If he is not married by his 30th birthday, the estate passes to a cousin. A dreadful man. We cannot allow it." The frankness of the statement landed like a slap. Waverly was not being chosen. He was being used. A convenience. A solution to a legal problem. The Dowager did not care who he was. Only that he was an Omega, present, and willing to be silent. "And if I refuse?" Waverly asked quietly. The Dowager blinked, as if the question had never occurred to her. "Why would you refuse? You were sent here by your family. They clearly wished you to be placed somewhere. This is a better placement than most Omegas of your background could hope for. Your background. Adopted. Tolerated. Unwanted." The words did not need to be spoken to be understood. Waverly set down his fork. His appetite had vanished. "I was not consulted. Not by my family when they sent me here, and not by this house when it decided I was to be married. I have been in Yorkshire for less than a day, and my entire future has been arranged without a single question about what I want." Silence settled over the table. Mr. Albright's eyes were fixed on his plate. The Dowager's expression had shifted. Confusion, irritation, the beginnings of distress. Crispin finally looked up. "Grandmother," he said quietly, "perhaps we should continue this discussion privately. Mr. Ashcombe has had a long journey. He is tired. He is ungrateful," the Dowager said, her voice tight. "He is honest." Crispin's tone did not change, but something in the room shifted. "And honesty is not a flaw I wish to discourage in my intended." The Dowager pressed her lips together but did not argue. Crispin rose and offered his arm to her. "Allow me to escort you to your chambers. Mr. Albright will see that Mr. Ashcombe finds his way back to his quarters." Waverly watched them leave, the Dowager leaning heavily on her grandson's arm, Crispin's head inclined toward her, his voice a low murmur of reassurance. The alpha did not look back. The corridor was cold and dark when Waverly found Crispin an hour later. He had not been able to sleep. His mind kept circling the same questions. Why had the Dowager claimed him so confidently? Why had Crispin allowed it? And what portrait had she spoken of, when Waverly had never sat for one? Crispin was in his study, visible through the half-open door. He was not working. He stood at the window, staring out at the winter-dark gardens, one hand braced against the frame. "My lord." Waverly stepped inside. "I need to understand what is happening." Crispin did not turn. "You were told. My grandmother wishes us to marry. The banns will be read Sunday. I was sent here as a companion, not a bride." "Yes. You have made that clear. Then why did you not correct her?" Waverly's voice sharpened. "You knew. From the moment she spoke, you knew I was not the person she believed me to be. You could have said something. You chose not to." Crispin turned from the window. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, dark and steady, held Waverly's with an intensity that made his breath catch. "Because I did not want to correct her," Crispin said quietly. "Because the mistake was convenient. Because I require a spouse, and you require a place, and the Dowager's error solved both problems at once. I do not require a place." The words came out sharper than Waverly intended. "I was managing perfectly well before your grandmother decided I was someone I am not." "Were you?" Crispin's gaze did not waver. "The Ashcombes sent you here as a companion, a temporary position with no security, no future, no guarantee of anything beyond the Dowager's remaining years. Your adoptive family did not negotiate a marriage for you. They did not provide a dowry. They sent you north in winter with a single trunk and no expectation of your return. He paused. Forgive me if I do not see the management as perfect. The words hit with the force of truth. Waverly's hands clenched at his sides. You know nothing about my family. I know they did not value you. I know they sent you away the moment it was convenient. I know you have spent your life being tolerated instead of chosen. Crispin stepped closer. And I know that I am offering you something they never did. Stability. Security. A name. You are offering me a cage and calling it a gift. A cage implies a locked door. I am offering you a door and asking you to walk through it. Crispin's voice dropped. Stay. Marry me. Not because my grandmother demands it, but because you have nowhere else to go and I have no one else to ask. We are both pragmatic people. Let us be pragmatic together. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Waverly stared at him, this alpha who had allowed a mistake to stand, who had watched Waverly struggle and said nothing, who was now asking for something that sounded almost like consent. You should have told me, Waverly whispered. From the beginning. You should have been honest. Yes, I should have. Crispin's voice was steady, but something flickered in his eyes. Regret, perhaps, or the ghost of it. I am not asking for forgiveness. I am asking you to stay. Waverly closed his eyes. The journey. The rain. The Dowager's voice from the stairs. The portrait he had never sat for. The alpha who had watched his confusion and let it happen. I don't trust you, he said. I know. I don't understand why you want this. I know. And I am not, I have never been, chosen. By anyone. For anything. I do not know how to be what someone wants. Crispin's hand moved. Hesitated. Then settled lightly on Waverly's arm. The first time the alpha had touched him since his arrival. You do not need to be anything except what you already are. That is the point. Waverly opened his eyes. Looked at Crispin's hand on his arm. Looked at the alpha's face. Controlled, unreadable, and yet somehow, impossibly, sincere. I will stay, he said quietly. For now. Until I understand what this is. But I am not your intended. Not yet. And I will not pretend to be something I am not. Crispin nodded. That is all I ask. He released Waverly's arm. The warmth of his touch lingered. But to understand how Waverly ended up in that hall, being claimed as someone he wasn't by a woman who had never met him, you need to go back. Back to the Ashcombe estate in Somerset. Back to the letter that arrived in Lady Ashcombe's sitting room 3 weeks earlier. Back to the moment Waverly learned he was being sent away, not as a bride, not as a choice, but as a problem to be solved. The Ashcombe estate was smaller than it had once been. The family had been declining for 2 generations. Money leaking away through poor investments. Social standing eroding through a series of unfortunate marriages. Lady Ashcombe, Waverly's adoptive mother, had spent years trying to reverse the decline through careful management and strategic alliances. Her biological son, Waverly's brother Edmund, was her greatest asset. Handsome, charismatic, an alpha who would inherit what remained of the estate. Waverly was not an asset. He was adopted at age 7 after the death of a distant cousin, taken in out of obligation rather than affection. He had been fed, clothed, educated, and tolerated. Never loved. Never chosen. His Omega designation made him useful for alliances, but his quiet nature and his lack of dowry made him difficult to place. When Lady Ashcombe summoned him to her sitting room on a cold October morning, Waverly knew better than to expect good news. A letter has arrived from Yorkshire, Lady Ashcombe said. She held the paper as if it were evidence in a trial. The Dowager Lady Harlow requires a companion. An Omega of gentle temperament. The position is temporary, the span of the Dowager's remaining years, which the physicians estimate at 2 or 3. You will go. Waverly stood in front of her desk, his hands clasped behind his back. Why me? Because Edmund is being considered for a match with the Bellingham family. An advantageous connection. His presence here is required. Lady Ashcombe's tone was brisk, as if she were discussing inventory rather than her adopted son's future. You are available. The Harlows are a respected family. The arrangement will reflect well on us. Available. The word landed with familiar weight. Waverly was always available, for tasks that required no investment, for roles that carried no prestige, for positions that would keep him occupied without costing the family anything of value. I am to be a companion, Waverly said. Not a bride. Lady Ashcombe's smile was thin. The Harlows did not request a bride. They requested a companion. You should be grateful. An omega of your background could do much worse than a position in a respected household. My background. Adopted. Tolerated. Unwanted. The words did not need to be spoken. When do I leave? 3 days. Pack for winter. Yorkshire is cold this time of year. Waverly nodded. He had learned long ago not to argue, not to protest, not to ask for things that would not be given. He returned to his small bedroom, the one at the back of the house, overlooking the kitchen garden, and stared at his reflection in the spotted glass of the window. His face was pale. His eyes were tired. His omega scent, carefully suppressed through years of herbal tinctures and rigid self-discipline, was barely detectable even to himself. A companion, not a bride. At least I know what I am this time. He began to pack. Silence had a texture in Harlow Hall. In the Ashcombe house, silence had been thin, a held breath, a swallowed word, the pause before someone remembered he existed. Here, silence was thick as wool. It settled into the stone walls and heavy drapes and the spaces between people who had known each other too long to need speech. 3 weeks passed. The wedding banns were read in the village church. Waverly Ashcombe and Crispin Harlow. The names sounded foreign joined together, like words from a language he had never learned to speak. The Dowager called him dear boy and spoke endlessly of flower arrangements. Mr. Albright addressed him with careful, measured respect. The household adjusted around him the way water adjusts around a stone, not embracing, but accommodating. Crispin remained a locked door. He inquired after Waverly's health each morning. He ensured his quarters were adequately heated. When he noticed Waverly shivering in the drafty morning room, warmer clothing appeared the next day without comment. He corrected the Dowager gently when she pressed too hard about wedding details, redirecting her with the ease of long practice. But he did not come closer. He did not linger. He did not speak of anything that mattered. And Waverly, who had spent 22 years learning to expect nothing, found himself undone by the cruelty of almost kindness. It would have been easier if Crispin were cruel. Cruelty had edges. Cruelty could be gripped. If you'd like to support this channel, consider joining Patreon, where you'll also get access to exclusive and uncensored stories I can't post on YouTube. This careful, distant courtesy was like trying to hold water. The heat came without warning. 18 days after his arrival. 3 in the morning. Waverly woke already burning. The Ashcombes had never provided proper suppressants. They had given him herbal tinctures, bitter, unreliable, the kind of remedy that worked just well enough to be dangerous. For years, Waverly had supplemented them with rigid self-discipline. Cold baths, controlled breathing, the iron refusal to let his body dictate his life. Tonight, none of it worked. He curled on his side in the vast, unfamiliar bed, one hand pressed against his mouth. The room was dark. Rain hissed against the windows. His own scent filled his nostrils. Omega sweet, terrified, completely exposed. He could not stop it. Could not contain it. Could not do anything except shake and burn and pray that no one would hear. A sound escaped him. Small. Broken. Footsteps in the corridor. Old footsteps. Careful footsteps. Mr. Albright. Mr. Ashcombe. The steward's voice came through the door, muffled but concerned. Are you unwell, sir? Waverly's throat closed. He could not speak. Could not form words. The door opened anyway. Mr. Albright stood in the threshold, a candle raised in one trembling hand. His eyes found Waverly, curled on the bed, drenched in sweat, drowning in his own scent. The old man's expression shifted. Not shock. Recognition. Sir, Mr. Albright said quietly, I will fetch Lord Harlow. No. The word tore out of Waverly's throat. Please. I can manage. No, sir. Mr. Albright's voice was gentle but absolute. You cannot. He was gone before Waverly could protest again. Crispin arrived in shirt sleeves. Waverly noticed this absurdly. Through the haze of fever, the alpha was not wearing a jacket. His hair was disheveled. His cuffs were unbuttoned. He looked like someone who had been pulled from sleep and had not paused to compose himself. His scent reached Waverly first. Cedarwood. Cold air. Something steady underneath, like stone that had weathered centuries and would weather centuries more. Waverly hated how much he wanted to reach for it. Crispin stood in the doorway, cataloguing the scene with those dark, assessing eyes. The rumpled bedclothes. The fever flush on Waverly's cheeks. The small shattered vial on the floor. The last of his herbal suppressants seeping dark into the carpet. You have been suppressing, Crispin said. It was not a question. Waverly's laugh was jagged. The Ashcombs did not believe in providing proper medicine. I was expected to manage quietly. Something flickered across Crispin's face. Too fast to name. I understand. Do you? Waverly's voice cracked. Have you ever had to hide what you were? Have you ever woken up terrified that your own body would destroy everything? Silence. Then Crispin said, very quietly, no. I have not. The honesty disarmed Waverly more than any denial would have. I should leave, Crispin continued. I should send for a physician and return to my quarters and pretend I was never here. That would be proper. That would be what you deserve. Then why are you still standing there? Because if I leave you alone tonight, the heat will burn through you completely. Because your suppressants have failed, and your body is in shock, and by morning you will be worse than you are now. Crispin's voice was steady, but his hands were clenched at his sides. And I find that I cannot walk away from you. I have tried. I cannot. Waverly stared at him. You have tried. For 3 weeks. Crispin's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Every moment I have been in your presence, I have been trying to maintain distance, to be proper, to give you space. And every moment, I have failed. He crossed the room. He did not sit on the bed. He pulled the straight-backed wooden chair from the corner and placed it beside Waverly. Close enough that his scent wrapped around him like a blanket. Far enough that he was not touching. The heat will stabilize if there is an alpha present, not through contact, but through proximity. Your body will recognize that it is not alone. It will stop fighting itself. You sound very certain. My father was a physician before he inherited the estate. I read his journals. A ghost of something, not quite a smile, crossed Crispin's face. I am not entirely useless. Another wave of heat was building. Waverly could feel it in his bones. If you stay, I will not be able to hide from you. You will see everything. I know. I will not be able to pretend I am fine. I know. I will want things I have no right to want. Crispin was silent for a moment. Then, what things? Waverly opened his eyes. Crispin was looking at him, not through him, not past him, not with the cool assessment of an alpha evaluating an inconvenience. He was looking at Waverly the way someone looks at a question they desperately want to answer. To be seen, Waverly whispered. To be chosen. To be wanted. Crispin leaned forward. His hand settled on the bed beside Waverly's, not quite touching. I see you, he said quietly. I have seen you since the moment you walked into this house, dripping wet and furious and trying so hard to be invisible. I see the way you make yourself small in rooms where you deserve to take up space. I see the way you flinch when someone speaks kindly, because you have been given so little kindness that you do not recognize it. I see the way you protect yourself with silence because silence is the only armor you were ever given. Waverly could not breathe. And I want you, Crispin continued, his voice rough now, in ways I have no right to want anyone. I want you to stop hiding. I want you to stop expecting cruelty. I want you to understand that you are not a mistake, not a convenience, not a problem to be solved. He paused. I want you to stay. Not because my grandmother demands it. Not because the inheritance requires it. Because you choose to. The heat crested. Waverly reached for Crispin's hand blindly, gripped it like a lifeline, and rode the wave with the alpha's scent anchoring him. Crispin's voice murmuring words he could not quite hear. Crispin's presence steady and absolute and there. When it passed, Waverly was shaking. Exhausted. Hollowed out. But still alive. Crispin had not moved. His hand was still in Waverly's grip. You stayed, Waverly whispered. I said I would. No one ever has before. Crispin's fingers tightened around his. Then everyone before was a fool. Dr. Emery Hale arrived 4 weeks later. He examined Waverly in the bedchamber while rain tapped against the windows and a fire crackled in the hearth. When he finished, his expression became carefully neutral. The face people wore before delivering news that would change everything. You are with child, Mr. Ashcombe. The room tilted. No. Waverly sat up too quickly. That is impossible. Lord Harlow and he did not touch me. He stayed during the heat, but there was no. In rare cases, proximity during a violently suppressed heat can be sufficient. Dr. Hale's voice was gentle but certain. When an alpha and omega share unusually strong scent compatibility, the omega's body may respond to stabilization as if it were a bond-forming encounter. It is uncommon, but I have seen it twice before. Waverly's hand moved to his abdomen without conscious thought. A child. Crispin's child. Conceived not through passion or violence but through proximity. Through his body reaching for something it recognized even when his mind was too afraid to ask. Does Lord Harlow know? I came to you first. Thank you. Waverly's voice was barely audible. I will tell him myself. Crispin was in his study. Of course he was. Waverly was beginning to understand that Crispin retreated to this room the way other men retreated to drink. To escape the disorder of emotions he had never learned to process. He looked up when Waverly entered. Something in his expression shifted immediately. You are unwell. I am with child. The words dropped into the quiet room like stones into still water. Crispin went completely motionless. For several long seconds, he did not speak. Did not move. Did not seem to breathe. The heat, he said finally. But we did not. I did not. Dr. Hale explained. Proximity was sufficient. My suppression made the response stronger. My body. Waverly's voice wavered. My body chose you, even when I was too afraid to choose for myself. Crispin rose from his desk. The movement was controlled, but his hands were trembling. This changes things, he said. Does it? Waverly's laugh was bitter. You required a spouse. Now you will have an heir. The arrangement is even more convenient than before. Do not. Crispin's voice was sharp. Do not call our child convenient. The words hit Waverly like a physical blow. Is that what this is? Is that what I am? The mother of your child, the solution to your inheritance, the omega who happened to be standing in the right place at the right time. No. Crispin crossed the room. Stopped in front of Waverly. Close enough to touch. You are the person whose portrait I studied for months before you arrived. The person whose name I learned from matchmakers. The person whose circumstances I investigated until I knew every detail of your life. Waverly's blood went cold. What? Crispin stopped. His face changed, the realization of what he had just admitted. Waverly. What portrait? What matchmakers? Silence. You knew I was coming, Waverly whispered. You knew who I was before I ever set foot in this house. Yes. The Dowager's mistake was not a mistake. Crispin's voice was raw. My grandmother is old. Her mind wanders. But she does not invent things from nothing. She received a letter months ago from a matchmaker representing your family. Your portrait was enclosed. Your family was offering you as a match for my younger brother, not for me. He took a breath. But I saw the portrait. I made inquiries. I learned about your position in the Ashcombe household. I learned that you were tolerated but not valued, useful but never chosen. You orchestrated this, Waverly said. His voice was barely above a whisper. You let me believe I was a mistake. You let me feel invisible. Because I was afraid. Crispin's voice cracked. Because I have spent 30 years being the heir, the provider, the alpha who does everything correctly. Because wanting you felt like the most selfish thing I had ever done, and I did not know how to admit it. Because I thought if I told you the truth, you would leave, and I could not bear the thought of you leaving. The confession hung between them. Waverly's chest ached. He wanted to be angry. He was angry. But beneath the anger was something else. Fragile and terrifying and desperately hopeful. You should have told me, he said. I know. You should have trusted me. I know. I have spent months believing I was unwanted. Months believing I was invisible. Months believing I was alone. Crispin reached for him. His hand stopped just short of Waverly's face, hovering, waiting. You are not alone, he said quietly. You have never been alone. I have been here, watching, wanting, too afraid to speak. That is my failure, not yours. Waverly closed his eyes. The tears came, silent, helpless, the tears of someone who had spent too long holding everything inside. Crispin's arms closed around him. Gently, carefully, as if Waverly was something precious and fragile and worth protecting. I will spend the rest of my life making this right, Crispin murmured against his hair. If you let me. Waverly did not answer. He could not. He just let himself be held, for the first time in years, by someone who had finally learned to stop hiding. Percy Roth arrived on a cold afternoon in late November, and the temperature in Harlow Hall dropped by several degrees. Mr. Albright announced him in the drawing room while Waverly sat with the Dowager, her embroidery forgotten on her lap. Crispin stood near the mantel, going over estate correspondence. The fire crackled. The scene was ordinary, domestic. Then the door opened. Crispin. The voice was warm, familiar, touched with an ease that spoke of long acquaintance. You look positively medieval in this light. All this Yorkshire gloom suits you. Percy Roth was beautiful in the way a well-kept blade was beautiful, polished, elegant, and unmistakably dangerous. Fair hair, pale eyes, a smile that curved at the edges like a question. He crossed the room and clasped Crispin's hand with the comfort of someone who had done so 1,000 times before. Percy. Crispin's voice held something Waverly had never heard before. Warmth, yes, but also history. The particular cadence of a name spoken often, in many different tones, across many different years. You didn't write. I wanted to surprise you. Percy's gaze swept the room, cataloguing its occupants with an efficiency that felt predatory. It landed on Waverly, paused. And I see I am the one surprised. You've acquired an Omega. Acquired. Like furniture. Like property. Like something purchased at auction and displayed for guests to admire. The Dowager, oblivious, beamed. This is Waverly Ashcombe, Crispin's intended. Such a dear boy. They are to be married in December. Percy's smile sharpened almost imperceptibly. Intended. Not yet married. How modern of you, Crispin. Crispin's voice cooled by several degrees. Percy, this is Waverly, my fiancé. Waverly rose to offer his hand, a gesture of politeness he immediately regretted. Percy's grip was correct but cold, his eyes assessing Waverly the way one might assess a rival's purchase at auction. Forgive me, Mr. Ashcombe. Percy's smile was pleasant. Crispin and I are old friends. I forget that not everyone appreciates my sense of humor. No offense taken, Waverly said quietly. I am aware that I was not expected. Something flickered in Percy's gaze. Recognition, perhaps, or the first stirrings of interest in an opponent who might actually be worth defeating. What an interesting thing to say. Crispin moved subtly, positioning himself between them. The gesture was small enough to appear casual but deliberate enough that Waverly noticed. How long are you staying, Percy? Indefinitely, I hope. London was becoming tedious. Percy turned away from Waverly as if he had already ceased to exist. Tell me you still keep the good brandy in the library. I've been dreaming of it for months. Their voices faded into familiar rhythms, into shared references and old jokes and the easy intimacy of people who had known each other before Waverly existed. Waverly sat back down beside the Dowager, who patted his hand absently and returned to her embroidery. He had been invisible before. He knew the texture of it intimately. But this was different. This was not being overlooked. This was being erased. Percy integrated himself into the household with alarming speed. He joined meals. He walked with Crispin across the estate, their heads bent together in conversation. He sat with the Dowager in the afternoon and charmed her so effortlessly that she called him dear boy by the second day. Waverly observed. Observation was the only talent no one had ever taken from him. Percy never struck directly. That would have been vulgar, and Percy was never vulgar. His cruelty wore gloves. It spoke in pleasant tones and smiled while it cut. You must find Yorkshire winters difficult, Percy said one afternoon in the drawing room, his voice solicitous. The Dowager had dozed off in her chair. They were alone. So harsh compared to Somerset. Crispin always preferred company that could endure the cold. I have no complaints about the weather, Waverly replied evenly. How adaptable of you. Percy's smile was pleasant. Adaptability is such a useful quality in a spouse, particularly one who wasn't originally intended for the role. Another day, in the library, you read estate law, Mr. Ashcombe? How diligent. Though I imagine bearing an heir is contribution enough. At dinner, when Crispin was distracted by Mr. Albright's accounting questions, pregnancy suits some omegas. It gives them purpose. In the corridor, softly, when no one else could hear, do you ever wonder who Crispin might have married if his grandmother hadn't been so confused? Each remark was small, polished, impossible to accuse without sounding oversensitive. Each one settled into Waverly like a stone dropped into still water, the ripples invisible to everyone except the person drowning in them. And Crispin, for days, did not see, or did not look closely enough. Waverly could not tell which hurt more. The incident with Mr. Albright happened on a Thursday. It was a small thing. The old steward had placed a silver tray on the wrong sideboard in the main corridor. A minor oversight, easily corrected. The kind of mistake anyone might make after decades of service. Percy noticed. Mr. Albright. Percy's voice was pleasant enough to carry. I believe the tray belongs on the east sideboard, not here. At your age, one would expect such details to be second nature. How unfortunate. The steward stiffened. His face flushed with humiliation. My apologies, Mr. Roth. I will correct it immediately. See that you do. Percy smiled. Servants passed in the corridor, pretending not to listen. Familiarity with a house should not breed carelessness. Crispin values precision. I would hate to see him disappointed in someone who has served so long. The threat was unspoken but unmistakable. I have Crispin's ear. I can damage your reputation. I can take away everything you've built. Mr. Albright bowed, his old hands trembling as he lifted the tray. Waverly stood at the far end of the corridor, unseen. His hand rested protectively on his abdomen. He understood now with visceral clarity. Percy was not merely unpleasant. He was dangerous. He understood hierarchy and humiliation the way a surgeon understood anatomy. He knew exactly where to cut. And then Waverly saw Crispin, standing in a doorway behind Percy. Silent. Watching. Their eyes met across the corridor. Crispin had seen the thing as it happened. Not afterward. Not through explanation. Not softened by Percy's charm. Waverly watched understanding begin in the Alpha's face. The crack in whatever image of Percy he had been holding. Percy turned, saw Crispin, and smiled as if nothing had occurred. Crispin. I was just assisting Mr. Albright with a small oversight. Crispin looked at the steward. Then at Percy. Mr. Albright has served this house longer than either of us has been alive, he said quietly. He requires no assistance in knowing where things belong. If there is any correction to be made, I will make it myself. Percy's smile held, but something behind it flickered. Of course. I meant no offense. Good. Crispin's voice was ice. Because offense was taken. He turned to Mr. Albright. The tray is fine where it is. Leave it. The steward bowed, his composure restored. Yes, my lord. Percy withdrew down the corridor, his footsteps unhurried. But Waverly saw the set of his shoulders. He was not retreating. He was regrouping. Crispin remained in the doorway. His eyes found Waverly again, and this time, something passed between them that had never passed before. Shared knowledge, shared witness. He had seen. Finally, he had seen. But he had seen only the cruelty toward Mr. Albright. He had not yet seen the cuts Percy had been making in Waverly for weeks. Waverly turned away. The garden terrace was Percy's battlefield, and Waverly walked onto it alone. It was late afternoon. The winter light was already fading. Waverly had come outside for air, for space, for a moment away from the weight of the house. His pregnancy was advanced now, nearly 7 months, and his balance had shifted in ways that still surprised him. He did not hear Percy approach. Percy moved quietly when he wanted to, and he wanted to now. Mr. Ashcombe. A word. Waverly turned. The movement was awkward. His body didn't respond as quickly as it once had. His foot caught on an uneven stone. His balance shifted dangerously. Percy was close enough to steady him. He did not. He watched. Waverly caught himself against the stone balustrade, his heart hammering, his hands pressed protectively to his stomach. For a terrible moment, he thought he might fall. He thought he might lose the child. He thought, "You should be more careful." Percy's voice was calm, almost bored. It would be unfortunate if your condition caused unnecessary complications. Crispin would be so disappointed. The words landed like ice. Waverly looked at Percy and saw nothing behind his eyes. No concern. No remorse. Not even satisfaction. Just emptiness where a person should be. And then, behind Percy, Crispin appeared on the terrace. He had heard. He had seen. And his expression was not controlled anymore. Percy. Crispin's voice was quiet. Step away from my intended. Percy turned, his composure flickering for the first time. Crispin. This is not what it. I said step away. Crispin moved forward, placing himself between Percy and Waverly. His alpha presence filled the space, protective and absolute. You will leave Harlow Hall tonight. You will not return. You cannot be serious. Percy's voice climbed. We have known each other for years. You would choose a convenient mistake over someone who endangered my child. Crispin's voice was steel wrapped in ice. Yes, I would. I have. You will go. Percy stared at him. His mask slipped, and for one brief moment, Waverly saw what lay beneath the charm. Rage, pure and cold and endless. Very well. But understand this. Percy's voice dropped. Sentiment is a weakness, and you have just revealed yours. He left. His footsteps echoed on the stone and faded. The terrace was silent. Waverly was still gripping the balustrade, still trembling. Crispin turned to him. His expression was still fierce, but his voice was gentler than Waverly had ever heard it. Are you hurt? No. Waverly's voice shook. I caught myself. The baby is fine. Good. Crispin's hand moved, hesitated, and then settled lightly on Waverly's arm. I should have seen sooner. What he was doing to you. His voice roughened. I saw how he spoke to Albright, and I thought that was the first time. But it wasn't, was it? Waverly closed his eyes. He has been cutting pieces off me since the day he arrived. I didn't tell you because I didn't think you would believe me. I would have believed you. Would you? Waverly opened his eyes. You have known him for years. I am the stranger. The mistake. The Omega who happened to be standing in the right place. No. Crispin's hand tightened on his arm. You are my intended. The mother of my child. The person I have been waiting for since before you arrived. His voice cracked. And I have failed you. I let him into this house. I gave him access. I was so blinded by old friendship that I did not see what he was doing to you. You see now. Yes. Crispin's jaw tightened. Too late. But I see. Waverly looked at him. This alpha who had been a locked door for so long. Who had kept his distance, his secrets, his carefully controlled composure. Who had admitted, finally, that he had wanted Waverly from the beginning, and still let him feel invisible. Percy was not wrong about one thing, Waverly said quietly. What? Sentiment is a weakness. You revealed yours. He will use it against you. Let him. Crispin's voice was steady. I would rather be weak and have you safe than be strong and lose you both. That night, Waverly lay in his bed and stared at the ceiling. Crispin had stayed with him until he stopped shaking, had sent for tea, had ordered extra guards on the estate in case Percy returned. He had done everything an alpha was supposed to do to protect what was his. But Waverly could not stop thinking about the weeks before. The small cruelties. The polished insults. The way Percy had made him feel small and Crispin had not noticed. Crispin had seen Percy's cruelty to Mr. Albright because it was public. Because it happened in a corridor with witnesses. Because the target was someone Crispin respected. He had not seen Percy's cruelty to Waverly because it was private. Because it happened in drawing rooms and libraries and quiet corridors. Because Waverly had been trained since childhood to suffer in silence. If I had told him, would he have believed me? The question circled, unanswered. Crispin had admitted his failures tonight. He had protected Waverly when the threat became visible. But protection that required visibility was not protection at all. It was mere reaction. Waverly's hand rested on his abdomen. The baby moved, a flutter of life and presence and absolute dependence. I cannot raise you in a house where I am only protected when the danger is obvious. The thought was quiet, terrifying, and absolutely clear. Percy's departure left a crack in the household that widened over the following days. Crispin was more attentive, more present. He asked about Waverly's comfort, his health, his needs. He sat with him in the evenings and read aloud from books of poetry that Waverly suspected he didn't actually enjoy. He was trying. But trying, Waverly was learning, was not the same as succeeding. The silence between them had changed texture. Before, it had been the silence of distance. Two people separated by walls neither knew how to breach. Now it was the silence of aftermath. Two people standing in the wreckage, unsure what could be salvaged. One evening, a week after Percy's departure, Waverly found Crispin in the library. The alpha was not reading. He was staring into the fire, a glass of brandy untouched beside him. You're thinking, Waverly said. I'm always thinking. About Percy. About you. Crispin looked up. About what I should have done differently. About why you didn't tell me what he was doing to you. Waverly sat down across from him. I didn't tell you because I have spent my entire life being invisible. Because telling someone you are hurting requires believing they will care. And I did not believe you would care. Crispin flinched. I have given you no reason to believe otherwise. No, you haven't. The honesty hung between them. I want to change that, Crispin said quietly. I want to be someone you trust. Someone you can tell when you are hurting. Someone who sees you before the damage is done. Waverly studied him. The firelight caught the sharp angles of his face, the shadows under his eyes, the tension in his shoulders that never fully released. I want to believe you, Waverly said. But wanting and believing are not the same thing. I know. I need time. I know. And I need, Waverly stopped. Swallowed. I need to understand something. Why did you want me? From the beginning. Before I arrived. You said you saw my portrait and made inquiries. But you never told me what you saw. Crispin was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. I saw someone who looked like he had been surviving his whole life. Someone who held himself carefully, as if he was afraid of taking up space. Someone whose eyes held the same exhaustion I felt every time I looked in a mirror. He paused. I saw someone who understood what it meant to be alone. And I thought, if I could reach him, if I could make him see me, perhaps neither of us would have to be alone anymore. Waverly's eyes burned. You should have led with that. I should have led with a great many things. They sat in silence, the fire crackling between them. Not the silence of distance. Not the silence of aftermath. Something new. Something fragile and uncertain and almost hopeful. We have a long way to go, Waverly said finally. Yes. And I am not going to pretend everything is fine. Not anymore. If I am hurting, I will tell you. If I am angry, I will tell you. If I feel invisible, I will tell you. He met Crispin's eyes. And you will listen. Not fix. Not dismiss. Listen. I will. And if you fail, if you retreat into silence again, I will leave. The words were quiet but absolute. Crispin's expression flickered with something like grief, but he did not look away. I understand. Waverly nodded. Good. Then this is the beginning. Not the end. Not the resolution. The beginning. He reached across the space between them and took Crispin's hand. It was not forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a door, opened from the inside, and Crispin stepped through it carefully, as if he understood, finally, that some things could not be taken. They had to be earned. December arrived with a bitterness that justified every Yorkshire warning. The sky turned the color of lead, and the wind howled across the moors, rattling the window panes of Harlow Hall. Inside, the house was quiet, a different quiet than before. It was the silence of a clock that had been rewound, the gears grinding as they learned a new rhythm. Crispin was a man possessed by a desperate, quiet diligence. He oversaw the final wedding preparations not as an inheritance requirement, but as an act of penance. He sat with Waverly every evening, though the books of poetry had been replaced by honest conversation about the estate, the child, and the jagged pieces of their separate pasts. Waverly watched him with a heart that remained under glass. He saw the effort. He felt the warmth of Crispin's hand when they walked the corridors. He heard the sincerity in the alpha's voice. But the glass did not shatter. He had spent 22 years learning that safety was a lie, and 3 months learning that recognition could arrive too late to heal the wound. The wedding took place on a Tuesday morning, the solstice. The village chapel was freezing, the scent of pine and beeswax thick in the air. The Dowager cried into a silk handkerchief, her mind clear enough to know her grandson was safe from the cousin she despised. Mr. Albright stood as witness, his face a map of quiet pride. When Crispin took Waverly's hand to exchange the rings, his fingers were shaking. I, Crispin Harlow, take thee, Waverly Ashcombe. Waverly looked into Crispin's eyes, dark, intense, and full of a pleading hope that felt almost unbearable. For a moment, the glass around Waverly's heart thinned. He spoke the words. He wore the ring. He became a Harlow. But as they walked out of the chapel into the swirling snow, Waverly felt the weight of the name not as a crown, but as a temporary shelter. The child was born in late February, during a storm that buried the first floor of the hall in drifts of white. It was a long, harrowing labor. Waverly drifted in and out of a fevered consciousness, the suppressed trauma of his life rising up to meet the physical pain of the birth. He saw his adoptive mother's cold eyes. He heard Percy's polished insults. He felt the rain of the night he arrived, alone and unwanted. Waverly, stay with me. Look at me. Crispin's voice was the only thing that brought him back. The alpha did not leave the room, ignoring Dr. Hale's protests about propriety. He held Waverly's hand until his own knuckles went white. He wiped the sweat from Waverly's brow with a tenderness that had no audience, no strategic purpose. When the first cry finally broke the silence of the room, Crispin collapsed into the chair beside the bed, his head in his hands, weeping with a violence that shocked the physician. A son, Dr. Hale announced, wrapping the infant in Harlow wool. A healthy, strong alpha son. Crispin took the child first. His large hands trembled as he cradled the tiny bundle. He looked down at his heir, the solution to his legal problems, the continuation of his line, and saw none of those things. He saw only the evidence of the person he had almost failed to see. He leaned over and placed the baby in Waverly's arms. "He has your eyes," Crispin whispered, his voice jagged with exhaustion. "Thank God he has your eyes." Waverly looked down at his son. He felt a love so sudden and absolute it terrified him. "I will never let you be invisible," he thought. "I will never let you wonder if you were chosen." "What shall we call him?" Crispin asked. Waverly looked at the alpha. Crispin was waiting. He wasn't choosing. He was letting Waverly author this chapter. "Julian," Waverly said. "After my father." Crispin nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. "Julian Harlow. It is a fine name." The crack in the glass arrived 3 months later. Julian was a thriving infant, the light of the Dowager's fading days and the center of Crispin's world. The alpha was a devoted father, often found in the nursery at dawn, cradling the boy so Waverly could sleep. To any observer, the Harlows were a portrait of aristocratic success. But Waverly was tired. Not of the child. Not even of the house. He was tired of the performance of forgiveness. He was tired of looking at Crispin and seeing the man who had protected him on the terrace, while still remembering the man who had let him endure the drawing room in silence. He was sitting in the nursery when Crispin entered. "He is asleep?" Crispin asked, his voice low. "Finally." Crispin stood by the window, looking out at the spring greening of the gardens. "The lawyers have finished the final settlement. The inheritance is secure. The estate will pass to Julian. My cousin has no further claim." "That is good news," Waverly said. He stood up, smoothing his robes. "Waverly," Crispin said, turning. "You are unhappy." "I am not unhappy, Crispin. I am finished." Crispin went still. "Finished with what?" "With waiting for the rest of me to catch up to you." Waverly met his gaze with a clarity that felt like an ending. "You have done everything right these last 6 months. You have been a good husband. A magnificent father. You have kept every promise you made in the library. Then why do you speak as if you are saying goodbye?" "Because being secretly wanted was never enough, Crispin. And being publicly chosen only after I was carrying your heir. It left a scar that will not fade. I look at you and I see the alpha I love, but I also see the alpha who watched me drown and only reached out when the water reached his own neck." Crispin stepped forward, his face pale. "I am trying, Waverly. I will spend 40 years trying if that is what it takes. I know you will. And I don't want you to spend your life in penance." Waverly reached out, his hand hovering over Crispin's heart. "I need to go, Crispin. Not in anger. Not to punish you. Somerset. To the dower house my birth father left me. I have the funds now. Julian will stay here, of course. He is the heir. He belongs to Harlow Hall." "You would leave your son?" "No." Waverly's eyes filled with tears. "I would never leave him. I am asking you to let me take him for the summers. I am asking for a life that is mine, not a life I was placed into by mistake." Crispin stared at him, and for the first time, he did not reach for control. He did not reach for duty. He reached for the truth. "If you go," Crispin said, his voice breaking, "the light goes out of this house. Then find the light in yourself, Crispin. Don't ask me to carry it for you." Waverly left Harlow Hall on a bright morning in May. The carriage was loaded with his modest trunks. The Dowager was sleeping, unaware that her dear boy was departing. Mr. Albright stood on the steps, his cap in his hand, his eyes wet. Crispin stood by the carriage door. He did not argue. He did not assert his alpha right to keep his spouse. He had learned, at a terrible cost, that love was not possession. "The dower house is prepared," Crispin said. "I sent men ahead to ensure the roof was sound and the nursery was ready for Julian's visits." "Thank you." Waverly stepped into the carriage. He looked at Crispin, the man who had orchestrated an accident because he was too afraid to ask for a choice. The man who was now standing in the sun, letting go because he finally understood what choice meant. Waverly, Crispin called as the driver took the reins. Waverly looked back. I will write, Crispin said. Every week. Not to ask you back. Just to tell you I see you. Waverly managed a small, sad smile. I'll read them, Crispin. I promise. As the carriage pulled away, Waverly did not look back at the grand stone towers of Harlow Hall. He looked forward, at the road winding through the green hills. He felt the weight of the ring on his finger and the child in his heart. He was not free of the scars. He was not finished with the pain. But for the first time in his life, he was not invisible. He was moving toward a life he had authored himself. And behind him, standing in the dust of the drive, Crispin Harlow watched the carriage disappear, finally understanding that the greatest act of love was not in the claiming, but in the courage to let go and wait to be chosen back.